You're listening to episode 39 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Meditation teacher Spring Washam speaks with us about having diversity in our communities and East Bay Meditation Center. We'll also have a bonus segment chatting with Roger Nygaard about the DVD release of his movie, The Nature of Existence. Show of hands. How many of us have ever walked into a room or showed up at an event and felt out of place? Either through age, gender, color, or ideological stance, there are many ways in which people can have hurdles to overcome. If we're fortunate, we've either grown up in environments conducive to open-mindedness, or we've become that way on our own. If we're not as fortunate, we may have some personal reactions to address. We can either pay attention to that feeling tone, positive, negative, or neutral, and make a positively fruitful response, or we can close the door to expanding our horizons. Something that's been discussed lately in our community is diversity. We see, for example, that Buddhist centers open to serve a particular cultural group do tend to have adherents from that ethnic background. But what about centers that are more Western in their approach? Do they really represent the diversity of their neighborhood? It seems that, though this is a sense and not based on any particular study, that the Dharma field is less diverse than the community in which it thrives. For example, the Facebook fan page for the podcast has a fairly limited representation by African Americans or the Latino community. Those who are with us have hopefully experienced a warm, friendly group that simply welcomed them as fellow Buddhists. But the question remains, in my mind, is this limited diversity really representative of our society? I confess to being somewhat passionate about this topic. The podcast, and my participation in this entire secular Buddhist movement, is due to the encouragement and compassion of one of my dearest friends who is Latino. So today, we're going to talk about diversity, and how we can create more inroads to those who may otherwise not find or participate in this wonderful practice. We'll be speaking with Spring Washam of the East Bay Meditation Center about her experiences and ideas about creating a more welcoming environment, which, when you think about it, is what secular Buddhism is about, having another open gateway for people to practice. Vipassana teacher Spring Washam grew up in California and began practicing meditation at an early age. She has studied Buddhism for over a decade and spent more than 2 years practicing in intensive retreat. She is currently studying under Jack Kornfield in Spirit Rock Meditation Center's teacher training program and is co-founder and core teacher at the donation-based East Bay Meditation Center in downtown Oakland. Known for her joyful heart and loving spirit, Spring is considered a pioneer in bringing mindfulness-based meditation practices to young adults and communities of color. Stay tuned after the interview with Spring, because we're also going to spend a few minutes talking with our friend Roger Nygaard about the DVD release of his movie, The Nature of Existence. So, sit back, relax, and have a nice hazelnut chai. If one exists, I don't really know, but it does sound kind of nice. And I'm here with Spring Washam. Spring, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, very glad to. Now, what is your role Actually, we'll get there. I'm going to put that on hold for a moment. We're speaking with Spring about the East Bay Meditation Center, and we'll get to that. But I want to hear a little bit more about your background growing up and what led you to have a meditation practice.
Well, my background growing up was, it was kind of, there's a lot of difficulties there. I grew up pretty much as a single mother and living in Los Angeles and also moving back and forth, Northern and Southern California. But, I think I got really interested in meditation when I went through a pretty intense period of depression. And so I started going to a church, and at the church they would meditate for about 10 or 15 minutes. And I attempted it as, being very young, and I thought, I can never do this.
Yeah.
It's so challenging, sitting still, and I never even thought of that. And then a couple years later, I had a real breakthrough when I read a book about meditation, and then at that point I took up a meditation practice, kind of practicing more in the Hindu tradition. And so that was difficult as well because they provide very little instruction. So when I was 23, I thought after a year of sitting in 3-hour meditation sessions where I basically just thought the whole time, I thought something is wrong. I need instruction.
Yeah.
I need to know what I'm supposed to be doing here. Something was just off. And so I ended up found out about a 10-day meditation retreat where it was silent and they gave you meditation instruction. And I was so excited. So I went there, and then at that moment, it was just, that became a passion, and really my path opened up at that point.
Now, what was that? You mentioned there was a book that you found on meditation. What was that first exposure? What was that book?
Well, the book was really interesting. It was by the Indian teacher who's now passed away, Paramahansa Yogananda. And he founded the Self-Realization Fellowship. And somebody left a book on my table. We had moved into a new apartment, and actually they left it by accident. And the title of the book was called Man's Eternal Quest. And here was this kind of Indian Swami on the front. I got bored one day. I picked it up, and it was as if my whole world opened up, and it was all about meditation. And at that, I can remember putting the book down that night and starting to try to practice. Yeah.
Now, the 10-day retreat that you went on, tell us more about that one.
So this was before Spirit Rock even had their land developed, and it was down in the desert, and a friend of mine had told me about the retreat, and so I remember driving down 12-hour drive, and I had just broken up with my boyfriend, and I had all my stuff in the car, and I was crying for 5 hours on the way, and I remember when I pulled out into this desert retreat center, I almost felt like I was going to collapse at the registration table, and I sat for these 10 days, and I got the instructions, and at that point I met my teacher who has been who's had a really big impact on my life, Jack Cornfield. I did not know the retreat was Buddhist. I didn't know anything. It just said meditation, vipassana. I didn't even know what that word meant. But it basically, I really had a life-transforming experience there. It was very calm, very concentrated. I've actually never been back to those states of mind that I had while I was at that retreat. It was this, something opened up, and it was really powerful. So it was incredible. And soon after that, I started going on many, many retreats, including long 3-month retreats, and that I dropped everything at that point, and meditation practice became my sole priority at that time.
Yeah. Now, what kinds of changes did you see in how you interacted with the world as your meditation practice continued?
Well, I think I was interacting with in the world with so much more love and compassion. I mean, that was the heart of it. I remember when I went on my first retreat, I remember when I left there, I said, well, now I'm going to be dedicated to helping to serve the world. And I went and got a job shortly after that, moved back up to the Bay Area and got a job working at a nonprofit trying to help African-American children in foster care find homes. And so it became a life of how can I serve. So I really see a direct impact on my inner transformation and then how I was starting to show up in the world. And also with my family, there had been so much struggle, and I hadn't seen my father in many years, and my mother and her husband were having so many challenges, and the way I started interacting with my family was so much more love and kindness, and that it was a really big impact there as well.
Mm-hmm. Now, how was your family supportive of this? Were they noticing positive changes in you as you were doing this practice?
I think originally my mother was terrified because I went away on my first retreat and I became so interested in Buddhism. It was as if nothing else mattered. And when I was going away on long retreats, I started sitting 3-month retreats at Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts. I started to go there. And I think she thought, oh my gosh, my daughter's leaving the world. What's happened to her? She's so damaged. That's all my fault. I was a terrible mother. She really took all of this into her own, as her own story became, I'm a terrible mother. My poor daughter can't function.
Right.
But when I would come home, she would see this loving person who was so caring. And so after a while, that won her over, and she started to see right away, okay, this is actually something that is benefiting my daughter.
Yeah, this is not a bad thing. This is not harming my daughter. It's opening her heart.
Yeah, and she also thought the teachers, like, who are these teachers? Are they influencing me? Is my daughter going to go to Asia and be a nun? I toyed with those ideas, too, in the early days of maybe going overseas for a long period of time. And so that was all confusing for her.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned you had been studying under Jack Kornfield. I think you've continued studying with Jack at Spirit Rock, and you've been through their teacher training program. Tell us a bit about that.
Well, the teacher training program, I've done a lot of training at Spirit Rock. The first program I was in a 3-year program, a community Dharma leader program. And so that ended about 6 years ago. And actually the last 5 years I've been in teacher training with Jack Kornfield. And I'm actually going to continue that training for about another 2 years. So it's a long process to train to be a retreat teacher, to be a meditation teacher and Dharma teacher. So it's a very thorough training. It's an incredible experience. I have so much respect for Jack and his contribution to the field of not only Buddhism but psychology and founding these centers, and so the training's been incredible. It's been rigorous and time-consuming and enlightening and joyful, and so I really feel that that's been a tremendous blessing, and I've learned so much.
Mm-hmm. Now, on your website, which I'll share with the users, is of course linked on the episode page for this episode, but if you're listening through iTunes, do go out and check out www.springwasham, that's SPRINGWASHAM.com. And you'll see more information about a number of programs, Spring, that you offer yourself. Could you tell us about a couple of those?
Well, one of the things that I offer a lot to is I do a lot of community-based teaching. So one of the places that I've been working with, one of the areas I've been working a lot with teenagers and children. So I've been teaching these teen meditation retreats for about 7 years. I'll be teaching a big one coming up over New Year's for Spirit Rock Meditation Center. And also working with children is really important to me. So I do a lot of mindfulness-based stress reduction, mindfulness-based education at schools, school projects, programs, after-school programs. And, a lot of what I do is community-based teaching. I mean, I teach meditation retreats, and that's beautiful, but I love to be in a community teaching a class for midwives, at an urban clinic. Or next day I might be, teaching a group of teachers or, a group of, social workers at, for their staff resource day or, so a lot of those, what I put myself out to do is to make myself available for all kinds of community-based organizations and health centers and schools to access me so I can come and share about meditation and teach that. So that's a big part of my website. It shows me working in schools and workplaces and working with youth and that kind of thing. So I enjoy that part of my life a lot.
Now, it looks like are you still at the moment teaching that comprehensive mindfulness program at West Oakland Middle School?
No, not this year. That program, I trained some different teachers. Some teachers were assisting me, and I actually turned that project over because this year I had other things, but I feel like that program is really was a pilot and actually a chance to see what would happen if we took an urban school, a young age group, and gave a comprehensive mindfulness program for a whole year. And I think the results were incredible. And it was a joy to do it, and I learned so much, and I feel like those lessons that we all learned were really valuable, are valuable in going forward. But the project still continues, and there's other teachers working on that, and they're still going with the curriculum that I developed, and so it's great, and that's a privately funded program, so it's really a blessing.
Now, what were some of the most rewarding things about that program and others that you've done like that in working with youth? I know you do programs with at-risk youth as well. What are some of the highlights of that? Some of the things that are you're going to bed at night like, yeah, this was good. What are some of those?
Right. I walk away and I'm like, good job.
Yeah.
Well, I think some of it, I think that's pretty easy to say. Some of it, a lot of it, I can say, is the kids recognizing that that violence isn't the only option. I mean, at West Oakland Middle School, the kids were in one of the worst neighborhoods in Oakland. I mean, West Oakland I think the poverty rate there is like maybe 85%. Most of the kids who live there, many are in foster homes. The school was primarily African American and just a neighborhood that people had just given up on. High crime, high drugs, so much violence. So for them, violence is so common. If you have this, if you're angry, you just hit someone. That's how they're treated. So to be able to make those changes that they could actually begin to communicate about how they're feeling, they could actually talk about a situation, not lead into fights. So the fact that we were able to bring down the amount of fights that they had at the school, that I could teach them how to stop and take a breath and what's going on, is there another way, that became very rewarding. And to actually see some of the things I was teaching in class that they could implement, was really inspiring,
Yeah. Chris mentioned that, Chris McKenna, in the interview we had with him as well, is something you had said, is that these are kids that people have given up on. And they don't have the kind of support and compassion and attention and people guiding them through better choices. And is that one of the challenges that you see, is just the whole attitude of people having given up?
Oh, yeah. I mean, that was clear that, the teachers there had given up on some. The whole school system had kind of given up here in Oakland on some of these kids who are the most challenged. And so you do have to come in with, this a certain amount of compassion and understanding for what they're going through. And they recognize people have given up on them. So building trust is very difficult. You have to show up again and again and again and be so consistent before they let their guard down. So I think that it's so complex how to reach kids like this and how to work with them. But I do think that consistency and that compassion and that really showing up and the continually teaching other tools is key, because they're not getting this from anywhere else. One person, that one 45-minute period that actually can talk about something different than what they're hearing in the neighborhood or from their own families of origin.
So something else that, and it's a wonderful segue into something that I wanted to chat with you about, and for folks who are on the Facebook fan page for the podcast, this is something that you may be familiar with as well, is that our demographic, shall we say, of Western meditation centers. We'll put it that way. If it's not a cultural center, in other words, it's not the Thai temple or the Sri Lankan temple or what have you, that it tends to fall along lines where there's not the same ethnic diversity and socioeconomic diversity that we see across the country. And what you've started at East Bay Meditation Center is very, very different, and it is breaking that mold. And I would like you to tell the listeners a bit about East Bay Meditation Center and how you decided to develop that.
Well, the East Bay Meditation Center was actually a long-term project, and it came out of a group of us. We started meeting almost 10 years ago. It took a long time for us to work out all the details before we actually opened. But the idea was that many of us, including myself, I would go to these meditation retreats, and I'd be the youngest one, the only one who I'm biracial. But when you see me, primarily you think African-American woman, the only one, and that made it really difficult. The teachers were very different than me. The community felt different. And although that world is, obviously it's a part of my world, but it felt not always comfortable. And what happened was when I started talking about people like me and why isn't there more diversity here, people would come into these groups, not feel comfortable, and then they would leave. Right? So why are they leaving? That became something really important to look at. And so when we started early on having groups, so we said, well, what happens if we have a day long and we put a day long for people of color, say, or a day long for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community? The people would show up in huge masses. And so I started to realize that there's something that we have to create a different type of community. And a community that I want the kind of community that is important to me is a multicultural community. Is wherever a global world, that's the reality. And so the experiment in the East Bay was to create a center where the teachers reflect the demographics of the community. One of the things that people weren't connecting to is the teachers themselves. They would think, I don't have anything in common with this person. This person is not speaking my language. They don't have my background. They don't understand me, and there would be a wall.
And yet this is a living being, and you give love and affection to your pets, more so than you do to people of other backgrounds from you within your own community. And you do have things in common. We're all going through at various times in our lives suffering. We could all benefit from a meditative practice, from more mindful decision making. So there is that commonality, and we need to look at those and open those doors. Tell us more about providing those inroads to people.
Yeah, because this is what you're saying is precisely right. It's the inroad. Initially, when people come into a practice like meditation, it's already exotic to them. It's unusual.
Yes,
the color come from a very religious background, right? So already they're walking out of their comfort zone into something. When you're meditating, it's vulnerable. You're actually bringing up memories. You're healing yourself. This is sensitive. What happened was we realized with our community there was this intense vulnerability to be sitting with their sorrow and their loneliness and their anxiety and their fear. And so what we recognized was safety became this huge need. And that was not so addressed at the bigger centers. There wasn't this understanding of a safe environment. And oftentimes teachers unknowingly would say things that weren't insensitive, but they weren't inclusive of these other communities.
Yeah.
It's like when we get in the habit of talking to our community, who reflect our ethnicity, our class, we can forget this whole other group, and we start to get into a groove, and that groove is not always in tune. And so what we noticed was that when we started creating classes and programs at the East Bay Meditation Center, when people started doing the meditation practice, when they initially got into it and they understood, I'm not alone, I'm not a freak, other people meditate, oh my God, this actually is a viable spiritual path with community, there's a lot more openness now to going to these other centers. But initially when they walked through the door, it was almost like we had to protect them a little bit to keep them coming in that door. Yes, this is a beautiful path. Yes, this is healing. And allow them to do some of that initial work. And then, they open up into, oh, yes, we are all the same. But there is a kind of doorway which we're kind of bringing people in, and that doorway has to, we have to hold that in a certain way.
Yeah. It's not just a matter of holding the door open. It's having a nice big door with a bright, shiny place inside with open hands, and they're welcoming hands. And as you're saying, that people going in who are even just starting to do a meditation, they're curious about that. Right from the get-go, it's very, very, very exotic at that point. And so if you add on to it a big cultural change as well, that makes it even more challenging for people. And one of the things that those of us who have a more secular practice or a pragmatic practice is to make that available as you don't have to adopt an entire different culture from your own in order to do this practice and to learn from meditation and from Buddhist thought, that it doesn't mean that you have to give up being something else. You still retain your own cultural identity while doing this practice.
Mm-hmm. I think that's something we very much stress at the East Bay Meditation Center, because we're not really interested in creating huge. We're not interested in propagating Buddhism so much as we're interested in healing and wisdom and compassion. And so we very much have a very light-handed approach on that. And for the first 2 years, a lot of what we called it was stress reduction, relaxation, getting in touch with your inner, your heart, your feelings. We only in the last 2 years have we come around to teaching more core Buddhist classes. And that has come from the community asking. Like, okay, I'd like to go a step further with this now. But, we were teaching mindfulness. But we were, that's very much how we teach, is that you can be Christian and still come to East Bay Meditation Center. You could still do you could still practice Islam and come to the East Bay Meditation Center and learn meditation. So we're very much, or no religion, or you're exploring, or whatever, however you identify.
And I'm finding that there are people for various reasons, who are not finding as welcoming an atmosphere in their home religion, whatever it may be, and they're looking at other alternatives. And I know Buddhism is one of those that is frequently looked at. And there isn't a reason, again, why you can't be a practicing member of your faith and still have a meditative practice and benefit from that, because it's a human thing. It's not you have to be Buddhist to do this. Anyone can do this.
Right.
It's breathing.
Right, exactly.
Put your mind on breathing.
Mm-hmm.
That's a human thing. That's not a Buddhist thing.
Right.
So
I agree.
What are some of the things that you have planned in your growing of the community? Because you built a center that is ethnically representative of the community you're in, and other centers they're not seeing that. So what are some of the things that you would recommend to people who have centers to provide outreach and open those doors to people in their communities?
Well, I think one of the things that you have to be really aware of is do you have a diverse teaching body? I think that has been key. Who are the teachers? Is there people that you can bring in to create a more diverse, it's not that you want to bring people who aren't qualified, but it's to look outside of the box. And so just look at who's doing all of the teaching. So if there's a center, Inside Meditation Society, right now they're working on that. Like, okay, we have only time people of color come here is when we have that retreat once a year. Why aren't they here the rest of the year? Okay,
right.
Let's look at the staff. Okay, there's only, the staff is all, middle-aged, European people, and so it's like, okay, well, it's not for other people to walk in. It's daunting a little bit. And I think just the recognition of one person coming into a room full of another ethnic group that, like, I think for some people, I'll just say, and also being biracial, my mother's white, my father's African American, just coming to a group of all white people, that's challenging. Just like it would be, even though everyone's American here, it still creates. And so I think the first thing is an awareness about that. Like just going, maybe this could be a little uncomfortable. The other thing is doing specific targeting groups. So you want to start to bring people in. So you might have a half day for the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender community. Or you might have a half day for people of color to just come, and that is so welcoming, Or you might change the language on your flyers to say people of all ethnic backgrounds. There's code language that makes people feel comfortable that other ethnic groups identify with. And so it's learning that language and being creative with that, So those are some things, and that one is a very a long topic, and we're trying to work with Sanghas across the United States and who are reaching out to us and saying how we want this, we want to create this.
So tell us, how can people get in contact with you, or who should they reach out to get more information about doing that?
Well, they can contact me. I'm happy to give a lot of information out. I talk to people about this all the time. I would encourage people, they can send me an email. My email is on my website, so it's very public. They can just, if they're interested in some ideas, I can offer some support. To local Sanghas, what I do often is they'll all come and I'll lead a day long for a group there. So like I went down to Redwood City recently and did a day long for people of color. And then, I'll go to different areas. I do a lot of that at Spirit Rock. And this is the way that people start to get comfortable coming to the center, number one, and then feeling really welcome when there's a day, especially for this group, where they can relax, talk about their feelings, be comfortable, welcomed. Welcome is the big thing.
Yeah, I would imagine, for me growing up in Chicago, it's still odd for me being now in Minnesota and going into a room where it's all people as pasty as I am. To me, that's kind of odd. I'm used to having a much more diverse group of people in any given room. And so it's very strange for me. I have the discomfort even being a middle-aged white guy in the room of middle-aged white guys. It's still not right. And seeing that would be a hurdle, and it's things that we may think of as being very subtle, that really they're subtle moment by moment. And that really is a continuity of discomfort that can lead people away. And what we want to do is turn that around into a continuity, as you were saying with working with in the youth programs, is having that consistency and that continuity of welcoming, feeling. And we talk a lot in Buddhism about our feeling tone of the moment, and we don't mean that as an emotion, but we mean that as positive, negative, neutral. We want to make that a very positive thing. And that means taking that step, as Spring you're describing, of doing the outreach of the subtle but consistent things, like with the language in one's flyers and advertising, in having a regular set day for GBLT or people of color or whatever group that you're making the outreach to. But that is one of the things that many of us have noticed in our centers, is that we're not really representing our community. And it would be a really helpful thing, I think, to turn that around.
Right.
Spring, is there anything else you'd like to chat about while we're here?
Well, no, I think we hit on some really important topics, and I hope that it was helpful for anyone who's listening. It's a bigger topic. We could spend, hours talking about this. So it was nice to just get some key things out and hopefully inspire someone to, do things differently or anything.
I would encourage people to go to the website, to Spring's, www.springwasham.com. There's a link to it on the episode page for this episode, of course. But do reach out and take a look at some of the programs that Spring lists on her site. And if you're in anywhere near East Bay Meditation Center, go in, check it out, say hi, and Spring, thank you so much for being here. I hope to have you back on the podcast at some point because we will have other things to talk about.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really great. A lot of fun.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Andrew here with Roger Nygaard. Roger, how you doing? Nice to talk to you again.
Thank you very much. Yeah, good to be in sunny Southern California.
And he says that, everyone listening to the podcast, because he knows I'm not. I'm in Minnesota where we just had a blizzard and power out was out for about 30 hours, which was a good thing and leads into part of why I'm talking with Roger is about his movie, The Nature of Existence. And for those of you who are regular listeners of the podcast, you'll know that this was episode 32, where we had a full discussion about the nature of existence, and was really terrific. And that was shortly before there was a release here in Minneapolis, in the Twin Cities, where Roger and I were able to chat a bit at the movie release. And Roger, what I'd like you to do first is, for folks who are listening to the podcast for the first time, if you can chat for just a minute about the movie, The Nature of Existence, and then tell us a little bit about how the releases have been going.
Well, the film is about the nature of existence, and when people would ask me, what's the movie about? I would say, well, it's about the nature of existence.
It's appropriately titled.
I asked people all over the world to answer questions, the same set of questions. I sat down to write the toughest questions I could think of, and when I was done, I had a list of 85 questions. They're all listed on the website, by the way, The Nature of Existence, but I would always start with, for me, the big one, why do we exist? And then work my way down from there. What is the best thing about existing? What's our purpose? Well, a lot of people, when you ask them about why they're here and what is their purpose, God seems to come up quite a bit in religion, and for many people, the point of their existence is because of God. So that begs the question, well, define for me God. What does that word mean? There's, I think, a mistaken assumption that when someone says, I believe in God, do you believe in God? That you're talking about the same thing. I found people have very different definitions, and so they may think they're in agreement or disagreement, but they may not be because their underlying definitions do not match up. So part of this movie was to ask people to define things like God and religion and faith and truth. How do we find truth, and what is morality and free will, etc. So the movie is my journey asking people about these things all around the world, and I collected all their answers together. So the viewer can now judge for themselves what the Jainist thinks versus the Muslim versus the Buddhist or the Confucianist or the Baba lover or the Christian or the Native American or the atheist, the Buddhist. You name it, they're all there.
Yep. Now, how have this is an independent film, and I was able to see the film and meet you at one of these releases here in the Twin Cities, and it was very well received. I know folks in the audience, we had a full house, were just riveted to the screen and really entertained, and it was very thought-provoking. How have the other releases been going for you?
There's a big similarity with the screening you attended. It gets people talking, and the question and answer sessions afterward are spirited, to say the least.
Yeah.
Sometimes people really want to put the screws to me, and try to pin me down, and because in the movie itself, I purposefully do not choose a winner overtly. I don't overtly at the end say, okay, and the winner are the Jainists. I present them all to you and then allow the viewer to digest all this information. And, Roger, personally, what do I think? I think there is only one real rational conclusion that can be drawn from the movie. But not everybody draws the same conclusion. And so at all the screenings, this comes out from people, and I've had people have very, very different responses to the same movie. It's that's why every screening is really sort of exciting, because I don't know what's going to happen.
It's a big mystery, and I know you have a couple of screenings each day. At least that's how we did it here. And I know in our release we had pretty much a packed house with the secular humanist group. I know my friend Scott Lohman was there and managed that, and the Minnesota atheist groups were there, and we had a number of Buddhists in the crowd. Happily, a few people from the podcast had listened and came to the movie.
There was a group called Spirit Unlimited, which turns out my sister founded in Minneapolis, Teresa Nygaard.
Oh, really? I was wondering, because you had some fans there in the audience. I remember that night.
Well, it's my hometown, so a lot of my friends from high school and before and after turned up.
Now, something that, speaking of Minneapolis itself, one of the benefits of having this snowstorm and being out of power for 30 hours is I was able to catch up on my reading in front of the fire. And
as you were burning the books to stay warm.
As I was burning books to stay warm,
exactly. Read faster, we're getting cold.
And that was the drawback to my Kindle. I didn't have more books to throw in the fire. I was catching up on some of the magazines I subscribed to, and one of them is Skeptical Inquirer, and volume 34, number 5, which is the September-October 2010 issue, so it's the most recent issue, or one back, has a review of the movie by Richard Carrier. Now, Richard's one of the folks that you interviewed in the movie.
Yeah, he's got a quote, one of my favorite quotes in the film, and it's such a brilliant quote because he, in his way, boils things down to the simplicity of it. And the best answers are very simple. When we're talking about morality and the rules that people follow and like the Ten Commandments, etc., Richard said that for him, there's only really 2 commandments, and everything else flows from those 2 rules that he would abide by, or people he thinks, should abide by. And that's compassion and honesty. If you have those 2 rules, if you act in a compassionate and an honest way, everything else flows from those. You don't need 613 or 8 more or whatever. So that's his contribution to the film. And there's a bonus discs and companion discs where he's got many, many more quotes as well.
Yeah, he's for those who are not familiar with Richard, you can find out more about him at www.richardcarrier.info. And he's the editor emeritus of the Secular Web at infidels.org, and the author of Sense and Goodness Without God, A Defense of Metaphysical Naturalism. Now, one of the things I bring this up because he had a really nice quote in his review that I wanted to read for folks now, is, after you know other views are out there, you can never go back to thinking yours is the only way of thinking, and that's this film's biggest asset. You will see and hear more opinions from more diverse people on the big questions of life than you likely ever would have otherwise, even by copious reading, and most seem as sane, or as crazy, as everyone else. You'll often see yourself in these others who think entirely different things, and it will force you to ask, are you just like them? If all these people are wrong, and because they disagree, almost all of them have to be, odds are you're wrong too. So how do you really know you're the lone exception? The only one just happens to be right. And that's exactly the question posed in this movie, and that's the thing I like best about it. And one reason I wanted to have you back on this podcast for just a few minutes is to say that for folks who have missed the movie, they have an opportunity, which is fast rising. Tell us about the opportunity that can be found on the website, thenatureofexistence.com.
Right. The DVD is now being released, finally.
Woohoo!
And thenatureofexistence.com is the website, and there's a store page and where you can now order the DVD or the special edition or the companion discs. And they all fit in a stocking, by the way. Very good for stocking stuffers. Or if you get multiple copies, you can give them to all the people you know that need to see a film like this.
and there are quite a number of folks like that. I actually had gone out. I put mine on pre-order last week because I do encourage people who listen to the podcast and like questioning and finding out more about other people's point of view and just the entertainment value, and I know a couple of folks that I've recommended this to have already done so, is do check out not just the DVD itself, but I've gone ahead and ordered the 9-disc set because I know that what's in there is going to be fascinating to me even when it diverges from my own views. And you can, if you go to thenatureofexistence.com, down at the bottom there's a store link. And you'll see the companion discs, you could get them individually, but it talks about what their topics are. So if there are particular topics like prayer in the afterlife or morality and sexuality or sin and free will, these are topics that Roger's done a nice job of grouping those on the DVDs. So you can take a look there. And
2 topics per DVD.
Right.
I mean, the way this came about was when I finished the movie, my first cut of the movie was 5 hours long, and you got to cut it down to 90 minutes. People don't have
right.
time for more than 90 minutes worth of answers. So I had all this amazing footage with Richard Carrier and Richard Dawkins and Buddhists in China and India and Confucianists, etc., all talking about these subjects at great length. And you can only fit so much in the movie, right? But I just took what I had and started cutting it together into the length of a film that I would make on, let's just take religion and spirituality. That's 1 disc. Well, the religion segment, people have a lot to say about religion, and so
yeah.
I've got almost 75 minutes of fascinating dissections of people about religion, and is it good, and the good things it's done, the bad things religion has done, what is the origin of religion, will religion persist forever, why do people need religion, do they need religion, etc. And so each of these is an entire movie in its own about these topics. So if you especially are interested in truth or free will or faith, you can dive in deeper into each of these topics.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we asked you before, and I'll mention again, and I know you addressed some of this on the DVD sets, is kind of going into why people have the views that they do, and I presume you address some of this in the DVDs.
Yes, at great length. Why is the most important question. It's the biggest question. It's the question for me to try to explain why do people believe these things. What is the origin of our belief? Darwin comes up a lot, of course, with the scientists. Everything we do or think or feel has a Darwinian aspect to it or a reason for it, or it was adaptive at some point in our ancestors' history. So there's that side of it, and then there's the religious side where they explain the why as, it was created within us for a more divine reason. And somewhere in between those two I would call the spiritual reason. With this people who consider themselves spiritual, of which about a quarter of the population fall into that category now, I think are trying to embrace both or find aspects of both that work for them. So there's 3 ways to approach the why question, and we approach them all in the movie.
Yeah. Now, what's the date of when the DVDs are being released? Do you have different dates for different sets, I recall?
November 23, that's the release date for everything. However, the companion set will come just a few weeks later because it's 7 full movies, 14 hours of footage, and as soon as you and I finish this interview, I get right back in my editing chair, so it will be complete, so I can deliver it to you in time for Christmas.
Excellent, and thank you so much, and I do encourage people, if you didn't get a chance to see the movie, check out the DVDs. It really was, it's at the very least extremely entertaining, thought-provoking, and you do get exposure that we wouldn't otherwise get, because you do have interview sequences with Dawkins and with Carrier and with just a wide range of people, and you find out more about them. Orson Scott Card, you interviewed him at one point, and I was not aware that he was Mormon. And so
neither was I until the interview.
Right, so it's just, there's a lot of, oh, really, I didn't know that, moments that come along with just watching it, even if you don't go into the full set, although really, I'm gonna, because what I saw in the movie was definitely worth it. And Roger, thanks so much for doing this, and thank you for your time.
You're welcome. Yeah, I look forward to anybody listening. If you enjoy the film or don't, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And feel free. You can always contact me through the website at thenatureofexistence.com. And you can also answer the questions on our website. You can click on any of the 85 questions and post your answer, which I love reading people's responses.
Yeah, they are, and it's an excellent set of questions. So thanks again so much for being here. I'll talk to you later.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for the Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.